Hey everybody, great to have you back here in the fish tank. Today it is time. That's right, Minion Masters Meta. This is going to be the first meta review of Minion Masters 2.0. So, we are currently treading water a little bit. We're waiting for Hotfix 3 to come out, which hopefully will come out soon. I do have a video on that regarding all the stuff that's going to contain, but let's forget about that for a moment. Let's focus on the meta. And of course, we've got the new master, Tronvir. So let's see how he has shaken things up. We're going to look at the masters, the cards, the factions, the decks, all sorts of stuff. This is going to be a great in-depth review. Now, we're going to go over a lot of information. So if you need to pause the video to look at the slides or revisit them, please go ahead and do so. And just a little bit of admin before we go ahead. So previously what I was doing is I had a fairly automated setup to get the data from the leaderboards, put that into a spreadsheet, but then I had to manually put together all of these slides, but I got sick of doing that. So I dug into some Google scripting, and now I figured out how to automatically update my slides with the data being driven from underneath it. So that's really good news for me. Makes no difference to you really, but I enjoyed doing it. It's helpful. And I wanted to share it. But anyway, let's dive in and find out what's going on in the current meta. Right. Let's have a look at master popularity to start with. And to nobody's shock, Tronvir is dominating. So this shows overall master popularity. Yellow is 1v1, red 2v2 random, blue 2v2 pre-mades. And we can see that Tronvir is dominating almost everything. Maybe not the highest played 1v1 master, but definitely the highest 2v2 randoms and 2v2 pre-mades there, and well ahead of all of the other masters. Now, we know Tronvir is very strong at the moment. We know he's got some bugs that are making him weaker. They're going to be fixed in Hotfix 3. There's also going to be some nerfs to him coming up as well. So, as we can see, Tronvir is overall the most played master. Also, we've seen some increases this season so far for Milloween, Setsu. Small increases, but increases nonetheless. And of course, with a lot of people switching to play Tronvir, that means other masters are going to fall out of favour. So big decreases for Apep, also Morelia, Volko. A little bit less so for Diona and King Puff, but a lot of those masters seeing less play overall. Right, so let's break down the masters for the modes. We're going to look at 1v1 master popularity to start with. We've got two graphs here. On the left, that's last season, 1.51.1. And on the right, that is the new season, 2.0. Last season, Apep was dominant, then Morelia, Valorian, and Wrecked in solos. This season, we can see Apep is still the solo 1v1 master of choice, but Tronvir straight in there in second place. So Tronvir, we've also seen some uptick for Milloween. I think Milloween recently had a buff on her perk 2, may have changed things a little bit, who knows, and slightly more play for Ravager, Wrecked, and Ratbo. But where have the increases been felt on the other side of the coin? What's been played less? Volko's dropped quite a bit in solos, as has Valorian, and to a lesser degree Morelia, Stormbringer, and King Puff. Mana cost, average mana cost, always about the same. Doesn't really change too much. If you're new to the game, we always say look to have between 3 and 4.5 as an average mana for sort of an overall regular deck. Of course, there's very cheap cycle decks or expensive decks that can push the limits of those, but overall, that's the sort of average that you want to be looking for. Right, let's have a look for randoms now. Master popularity in randoms. Last season on the left, Apep, hugely dominant, King Puff, and then Morelia. This season, there's a new kid in town, Tronvir, 38.9% play rate in 2v2 randoms. Remember, this is play rate based on leaderboard decks. We don't have overall data, but we do have the leaderboard decks that we can, the data we can scrape. So Tronvir, massive. Apep second, King Puff third. So whilst Tronvir has seen huge amounts of play, we've also seen a little bit more of Valorian, a little bit more of Stormbringer, and that's basically the only ones that have increased. But of course, whilst everyone's been playing Tronvir, that means a lot less people have been playing Apep. down 19%. Morelia down 6%. Diona, Volko, and Rekt also feeling some drop-off. So 2v2 randoms, Tronvir is everywhere. And again, the average mana cost has remained the same at 3.7. Right, 2v2 pre-mades now. Last season, Apep was not dominant, but the most played master, followed by Stormbringer and Morelia. This season, again, Tronvir. So Tronvir, we can see almost 25% of the pre-made decks were Tronvir decks. So Tronvir, Stormbringer, Setsu, and Apep, the top 4 in pre-mades. So Milloween, Setsu, and Mordor have seen slight increases in play. We've seen big decreases to Morelia, and to a lesser degree, Apep, Kingpuff, Volko, and Diona. So a lot of people switching over to play Tronvir. Not in a properly balanced state at the moment, but so hopefully with the next patch, we'll get closer to it. Right, so Tronvir dominating, definitely in the 2v2 game modes, and there or thereabouts in solos. Next up, we're going to look at the rarity composition. Nothing really changes with this, but I always like to remind people, especially if you're new to the game, you'll see legendary cards, but legendary cards don't necessarily mean they're stronger than other cards. They just mean that they're kind of more unique. That's the way the rarity works in Minion Masters. The basic cards are the common cards, and then as they get more functionality, more uniqueness, they become more rare. So you can see here, as we expect generally, the decks are comprised mostly of common cards, which are the green ones. We also have some rare, some supreme, and the yellow legendaries in there. But always worth reminding people, especially when you hear about the game being pay to win, you can see the legendary cards only make up a small proportion of the cards that are being played. Right, factions. This is a new graph for this month. Overall factions. We will break them down into the modes previously like we did before, but this is a new one. The overall faction, so we can see that Zenshi was the most played faction overall in the last patch, with Voidborn, Scrad, and Empyrean following suit. But this season, Empyrean is the most played, followed by Scrat, Zenshi, and Voidborn. So we've seen some increases in play rate to the Stoutheart faction, to Crystal Elf, as well as Empyrean. But of course, what goes up must come down. We've seen some decreases in play for Outlander, for Voidborn, and Slither. So Empyrean, the most played faction so far. This is not a faction deck. This is just, if you look at the faction of the cards, then most of the cards, or, you know, the Empyrean was the most played faction. Right, and then again, we can break it down into the different modes. So factions per 1v1, 2v2 randoms, and 2v2 pre-mades. So we can see in solos, Zenshi is the faction of choice. It was last season, and it still is. Scrat and Voidborn fighting for that second and third place. Solos has seen an increase in Accursed, which we've definitely seen a lot of Accursed decks on the leaderboard in the form of Milloween or Morelia. So Accursed has gone up, Stoutheart, Scrat a little bit in solos. And whilst Empyrean is overall the highest played faction, it did drop off in solos along with Outlander and Zenshi. But there we can see in the 2v2 game modes, that's where the Empyrean cards or the factions start to dominate. The top played faction in randoms this season and in pre-mades as well. Big increase in Empyreans in randoms, a little bit less, but still an increase in 2v2 pre-mades. We've also got increases in play for Crystal Elves and Stoutheart, and we see some drop-offs to Outlander and Voidborn, as well as Zenshi. Right, so factions. Let's have a look at the top cards. So when we're talking about top cards, what we're talking about, these are the most played cards in our leaderboard analysis, and then we can kind of figure out if these are the most played cards, they're probably the strongest cards, right? So there we see top of the pile, Scrap Pack. And just to clarify the colours here, so if it's got a green border, that means it's ranked higher this season. If it's got a red border, it's ranked lower this season. If it's got a black border, it's ranked the same. And if it's got a white border, then it's a new card. So we can see Scrap Pack's still the #1 card here. And if you looked at one of my recent videos about the upcoming proposed PTR changes, one of those changes was a nerf to Scrap Pack, reducing the scrats from 5 to 4. Right, so the top 3, we've got Scrap Pack, Bounceberry Flingers, and Fergus. And also talking about the proposed PTR changes, one of the reasons a lot of people play the Bounceberry Flingers is for that Shroom, and the Shroom buff is potentially going to go down from 25 to 20% HP and damage in the next change. So if you're a new player, you're thinking about crafting cards, building decks around certain cards, this is a really good resource to give you an idea of what are the kind of the strongest, the most played cards at the top level of the game. So play rate this season, biggest increases for Groggy Woodsman and Caber Tosser. We've seen those a lot in decks together. Also Beam of Doom, Propeller Scrats, and again Bounceberry Flingers, they're seeing a good amount of increased play rate. Cleaver has dropped off this season. Remember, it did get a recent nerf down to 550 HP. And I think a lot of people are playing the Stout Hearts, the Groggy Woodsman, etc. instead of the Cleaver. Also seen decreases to Cursebearer Stint, Chain Lightning, and Swarmers. And going back to our discussion about the rarities, out of these top 27 cards, 15 of them are common, 9 rare, 1 supreme, and 2 legendaries. So again, just to give you an idea that most of the most played cards are very easy to get to craft. Now there were 13 cards that have been unused. If you can comment in the below the video, let me know what you think wasn't used. Have a guess. If you get it right, you might get a prize. 13 unused cards overall in all of the game modes. Right, so those are the top cards. Let's break it down a little bit. So these are the top non-spell cards, and we're going to break them down into the different game modes. So non-spell cards, we're basically talking minions or buildings. So 1v1, 2v2 randoms, 2v2 pre-mades. We see a lot of common cards across all of the different game modes. And we can see that Bounceberry Flingers, Scrap Pack, Elite Swarmer, very popular in solos there. But of course, when we get to 2v2s, cards that do AoE, area of effect damage, become way more valuable. So Fergus, we can see him in both of the 2v2 randoms and pre-mades as an example there. Now in solos, big increase in plays to Bounceberry Flingers, Defenso Chopper, Groggy Woodsman, Caber Tosser, and Neverbats. And as we mentioned previously with the overall reductions, Cleaver seeing reduced play rate, Jade Spark Watchers, Caged Prowler, Propeller Horde, and Legionnaires. Caged Prowler, I think it got a nerf fairly recently, so it's far more susceptible to things like Chain Lightning shutting it down. Now in randoms, big increases in play rate to Caber Tosser, to Groggy Woodsman, Crossbow Dudes, Warrior, and Fergus. But again, decreases to Cleaver, Elite Swarmer, Cursebearer, Scrap Pack, and Stint. And in pre-mades, we saw more play of Propeller Scrats, Shield Guard of Light as a big tanky unit, Divine Warrior in there as well. Groggy Woodsman again seeing increased play rate in that mode. And again, Cleaver seeing a reduction in pre-made play along with all of the other modes. Swarmers, Radic not really being in favour anymore. Vulture Prime and Whirly Scrat dropping out there a little bit. So most played cards overall, as we saw. So we got Scrap Pack, Bounceberry Flingers, Fergus, Elite Swarmer, and Tantrum Throwers as the top 5 non-spell cards. So if you're looking to build a deck, these are great places to start. Okay, let's switch over to spells. So top spells. So overall, top spells, Chain Lightning was the top played spell, followed by Beam of Doom, Blade Star, Bearvalanche, and fairly surprisingly, Pincer of Dread. But then if we break them down to the different game modes, we can see slightly different results. And interestingly, in solos, And we saw earlier with the increase in the Accursed faction play, a lot of Accursed spells. And we see a lot of Morelia decks with playing Accursed, Toll of the Dead, same with Milloween. And of course you've got the Corpse Explosion, you've got the Restless Dead, Unholy Ground. Some of them feature Howling Moon, some of them don't. And so I say this every time, but it's interestingly that the Accursed influence has moved. It used to be always a 2v2 strat, but of course we've seen some nerfs, some changes. Nive's Breath does a lot less damage than it used to, stuff like that, and it's become more of a solo 1v1 strategy. Right, so if you're looking to build a deck and you're wondering what spells to use, this gives you a great idea. You can't go wrong really with any of the top spells. Chain Lightning's always going to be valuable. Blade Star, it's one of those that's kind of difficult to use, but once you get a good idea of how to use it, you can get huge value over and over again. Again, we're going through a lot of this information very quickly, so if you need to pause the video, revisit it, screenshot it, whatever you want to do, go ahead and do it. Interestingly, in solos, biggest increase for spells, Grasping Thorns. Again, another Accursed card that we see in a lot of the Accursed decks. Also Harmful Souls, Corpse Explosion, and Toll of the Dead. So a lot more Accursed in solos. Blade Star, we saw a big increase in 2v2 in randoms. Beam of Doom as well as Pincer, Impetus Blast, and Morgrul's Mark. Rimmergul's Breath, dying a death, really. Remember, it got changed recently, so you can't play it on the bridges. So it has to be a defensive spell, which means you can't spray the opponent's side first. So it's kind of more difficult to use. So massive reduction in Rimmergul's Breath in both 2v2 randoms and 2v2 pre-mades. Also, Rapid Response Reserves dropping off as well. Remember, we've had some nerfs to that fairly recently. So that's the spells. Next up, let's have a look at the Legendaries. New players are always really keen to get their hands on Legendaries. You know, generally the way Legendaries work is you have one or two in a deck, you build around it to get the best value out of them. And if you're new and you're itching to spend your shards to craft some Legendaries, this gives you a great idea of where to go. My advice with Legendaries is if you want to craft them, you know, look to find Legendaries that are really flexible and they can work in lots of different decks. And that's a lot of the Legendaries you'll see here are ones that you can play in all sorts of different decks. You don't really want to buy a Legendary that you can only play in one kind of deck, you know, unless, you know, that's your real exciting deck choice. Right, so overall, Fergus is the most played Legendary by quite a way, followed by Jinglong, Lady in Frey, the Veilstalker, and Xiaolong. So those are the top 5 played Legendaries. We can see Fergus is, as you can see, in all of the game modes there. 4th in solos, and then 1st in both of the 2v2s. Jing as well, 1st in solos, and 7th and then 2nd. So a lot of these cards, flexible kind of decks, but also you can play them in all sorts of different game modes as well. So lots of bang for your buck there. Now, if we look at the cards that have increased, Legendary-wise, increased their play rate. Interestingly, Taluk seeing more play in solos. Yahoon as well. Corpse Explosion, Fergus, and Morgrul, the Swarmer King. Ardera, big drop-off of play rate in solos this season for her. Siege Imperator Ruby as well, dropping off. That may be to do with the fact that she's currently bugged and causing the untargetable minions, so that might be affecting that. That's going to be fixed in Hotfix 3. Jolo dropping off. Jinglong still there or thereabouts. So that's interesting. Jinglong is the #1 card in solos, but it's also one of the most reduced played cards. So it was played a lot, and now it's not played quite so much, but still clearly a lot. And Avea also dropping off in solos. Avea used to be everywhere in solos, then got changed, and now is nowhere. Fergus seeing a lot more play in randoms, as well as Chief Icebreaker Bolf, Xiaolong, Veilstalker, and Scotty, the Sensitive Savage. Not seeing much Prime Sergeant Radic, not seeing much Zip Zapinator, not seeing too much Razor Squadron, Corpse Explosion, or Hypnotize in randoms. Jinglong play rate going up in pre-made. You can see there he is currently second, was fourth. Corpse Explosion seeing more plays, so that suggests a Cursed decks in pre-mades. As well, we see Bara as well getting some more play. Lord Fanriol and the Wizard Puff. But Prime Sergeant Radic again dropping off in pre-mades, as with Cokes, Ruby again. Right, so just a reminder, overall top legendaries: Fergus, Jinglong, Lady and Frey, the Veilstalker, and Xiaolong. Right, so we've looked at all of the cards. Let's have a look at the decks. So what we're going to do basically is, we know we've got a ranking for the cards. Let's crunch that into the decks and see which decks have the lowest average ranking for a card, which means that's the highest. On paper, kind of in a way, you could say that's the strongest deck. It's got the most plays of cards in it, the strongest cards, and therefore the strongest decks. So let's have a look at them. So I've done it so we got a selection of different decks, so we don't just have 5 Tronvir Masters. So we can see top decks: Tronvir, Apep, King Puff. I've got another Apep there. I'm sure that I changed that, but I think I maybe messed it up a little bit. But let's just pretend that I didn't mess that up at all. So you can see a lot of cards are very familiar in all of these decks. We see Jinglong almost everywhere. Morgrel's Mark. We see Chain Lightning. So a lot of these top decks do have very similar setups, but a few key differences. So if you're looking for a strong 1v1 deck, this is a great place to start. Right, so next up, let's have a look at our 2v2 randoms decks. So again here, we've got a Tronvir, Valorian, King Puff, Apep, and Setsu. The Setsu deck's kind of interesting because it's only got a couple of spells in it, which is not what you would necessarily expect from Setsu, but it's clearly been working. And again, we see things like Fergus everywhere. We see a lot of Chain Lightning, a lot of Beavalanche, Blade Star. So really, when you get to the top level, you see a lot of people playing the same kind of spells, because there just tends to be spells that are a little bit better overall than other spells, and everyone just ends up using them. Okay, so that's our 2v2 random decks, and then we'll have a look at our 2v2 pre-made decks. So we got Tronvir, Ratbo, Volko, Stormbringer, and Setsu. Stormbringer, the pre-made decks are a little bit different because some of them are designed specifically to work with other decks. We've seen that in the past where you see we had like a Ratbo deck with a random Guardian in it, but of course that's because they were playing specifically with someone with Crystal Elves. So again, Tronvir being very, very strong. The Ratbo. One thing to mention, the way the leaderboard is shown in the new version of the game, we can't see wildcards. So we've kind of had to ignore wildcards for our meta-analysis this month, and until they re-implement it at some point. So we can't see which decks do and don't use them. For example, this top deck, we've definitely seen Lost Legionnaires wildcarded a lot in previous seasons, along with Crystal Archers. So that's probably the same sort of thing happening again, but we cannot confirm or deny that. Right, so those are the top decks. Now, I know we've been through a lot. It's a lot to take in. We still have some more, but what I'm going to do for the remainders is just quickly go through them. And if you want to pause and look at them, you can do. But I'm not really going to spend too much time on it. Basically, we're just looking at the top cards for the different masters. So we're just going to whiz through these pretty quickly. So top cards for Apep based on the different game modes. And one thing to note is we've got the number of decks. These are a number of unique decks to give you an idea of if this is a good amount of data. So we can see here quite a lot of Apep decks. But when we look at Diona, we can see 0 2v2 randoms Diona decks, only 3 in pre-made, so that kind of lessens the impact of of how valid that data is. Right, next up, top cards for King Puff. Next up, Milloween, the new artwork for her, of course. So we can see here, huge amount, especially in 2v2, pre-mades and solos, are cursed, and then in randoms seems to be more Crystal Elf based. Right, next up, Mordor top cards, heavier as you would expect. Ritual of Servitude in there as well, as you would definitely expect. Morelia. Again, a decent amount of cursed impact. Now we have Wrecked. And again, 0 Wrecked randoms decks, only 1 in pre-mades. That's interestingly a Wrecked Ritual deck. That seems to be something that someone's trying out there on the leaderboard. But a lot of solo decks, 46 solo decks there. Next up we have Ratbow. And then Ravager. Again, no Ravagers in randoms. Only 3 in pre-mades. Only 11 in solos. Okay, Setsu next. See more spells as you would expect with the spell synergy. Stormbringer, and Stormbringer is pretty dominated by Crystal Elves, again as you would normally expect. Lots of range units, lots of benefit from that perk 2, giving them extra range. Tronvir. So if you're looking to build a Tronvir deck, this gives you an idea of the sort of cards that people are playing with Tronvir. Okay, couple more masters to go. Valorian. And finally, Volko. Right, so we went through those quickly. So if you want to go back and have a look at them, pause the video, screenshot it, whatever you want to do. Right, so that's our for Minion Masters 2.0. Let me know in the comments, what do you think? Does what we've seen on our leaderboard analysis, does that equal what you've been experiencing in the game? Sometimes the metas are very different at the top on the leaderboard or lower down in different ranks, so always interesting to see how that affects. Unfortunately, we don't have direct access to all play rate, win rate, all sorts of data like that. We just have to scrape the leaderboards and do what we can with that. As I mentioned earlier, I have automated a lot of this now. So if there's more data you want me to extrapolate from the underlying information, let me know, and I can definitely put together some stuff for you. But yeah, as we mentioned earlier, we're just waiting for Hotfix 3 to come out. Things have been pretty rough with 2.0. They're getting better. It's going to be another step forward with Hotfix 3. We've got the new season starting a couple of weeks into February, I think. Tournament play should be back soon. Hopefully Hotfix 3 will iron out a lot of bugs, a lot of the gameplay issues, and we can get back onto some tournament play. But yeah, let me know if you're enjoying Minion Masters. The stuff I'm seeing on the Steam forums, the reviews and stuff, some people are really liking the changes. New players getting into it, really liking it. Some people really hating it. Also, some people having a lot of technical issues, whereas others, like myself, really not. So it's kind of a mixed bag. But hopefully, as I said, things getting better. If you're enjoying the content here in the fish tank, make sure you hit that subscribe button to keep up to date on all things Minion Masters related. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and let me know in the comments anything. Tell me how your day's going. As I spoke about earlier, I think there was 12 or 13 or 14 cards, something like that, that were unused in our analysis. Have a guess in the comments. Can you guess one of the unused cards? If you do, you might get a prize. I'll reach out to you. Anyway, that's all I wanted to cover today. I'm Bad as a Fish, and as always, I'm awkwardly waving.